as we get ready to do our next story of transformation and testimony, I asked Victoria if she'd be willing to share a few things. And let me tell you why and how some of the things work. One of the things is that when we talk about the sermon today, it's going to be on acceptance and how those who are weak or those who are stronger have to accept the weak. And since I've lived in Ames, I don't believe that there were two more open-minded, accepting people than Victoria and Keith. They don't know a stranger, and they didn't care who you were or what you looked like. And so when I was planning out the series, I immediately thought of her, and I asked her if she'd be willing to talk a little bit this morning. And one of the things that I don't give them a lot of help here. Sorry, I don't know if that's bad on my part or good. I want to hear what they have to say. But one thing that we will definitely bring up is that I enjoy her family. And so we'll end up talking family at some point. But with that, I'm just going to let you have it, Victoria.
Okay. Well, I asked for assistance with this, and I got a message back that said loving and accepting others regardless of where they are in life. And that was the topic. And that certainly at least gave me a place to start. Keith and I have been told over the years that we're accepting, maybe above average, but I'm going to give you my background. If you're in the adult Sunday school class, the older adult Sunday school class, those of us with gray hair, you'll know my story, but I see a lot of faces who don't. I started out being born into a multicultural family. My father was Pennsylvania Dutch in the hills of Pennsylvania. His family were coal miners. Some of them owned a little local grocery store, but basically they lived and married within the Pennsylvania Dutch German-speaking community. He was the first one in his family or immediate family who ever married outside of that.
Okay.
He met my mother in Europe in 1931. She's from the other side of the globe. Her family are Polish-Russian Jews who fled Russia at the time of the pogroms, which means an organized vendetta against a particular group. In this case, the Jews. They lived in the town of Gomel, which is now in Poland, I believe. We look it up occasionally on the map. Poland's borders change depending on who's in power and who got to gobble which pieces. They left and came to America. Can you hear me? I'm not holding the mic up here. They left and came to America to avoid religious persecution. She was the first person in her Jewish family ever to marry outside of her Jewish ethnic heritage. Because Judaism is not only Jewish as a faith, it's Jewish as an ethnicity in the same way that being Pennsylvania Dutch was an ethnicity as well as a faith. They were shaped by their community and their faith, but they both married outside that. So, of necessity, my family was one with more space in it for different backgrounds and different faiths.
Okay.
My father, I meant to bring my parents' Hebrew wedding certificate. My father accepted Judaism and they were married in a Jewish ceremony. And my grandmother took charge of the paper that said they were married, because without that he couldn't divorce my mother within. They also had a civil ceremony. And although my father accepted Judaism for the purposes of the marriage, they never practiced Judaism. And when I came along after they'd been married 11 years, it was 1943, it was the middle of the Second World War, They raised me and my sister as Christians from the very first day. I think nobody knew whether Hitler might actually, after all, win, what the world would look like for people of Jewish faith if that happened. So we were raised Christian.
That's interesting.
I assume that was the motivation. The interesting thing is my Jewish mother took my sister and me to church every Sunday of our lives, and it was an hour-and-a-half drive to that particular church. I will forever be grateful. She didn't have to do that, but she did it. She herself never joined the Christian faith, but she made sure we went to church every Sunday. So there's an accepting and giving relationship there in their marriage, in their attitude towards faith, in their wish to guarantee their children the best start in life. Thank you. I do not wish to have been a victim to prejudice against Jews. I wasn't a Jew, that is, ethnically, yes, religiously, never, right? But that would have made no difference if Hitler had won. If he'd eventually taken over America, which I doubt, he'd have had to take it square inch by square inch, okay? My mother also knew prejudice. When she grew up, they would go to buy butter at the local grocery store, you know, the corner store in their little town. And she'd go in and ask for sweet unsalted butter, which is what the Jewish people cook with, because iodine comes from shellfish and they're not allowed to eat shellfish, okay? And so the proprietor of the store would always yell back, "Hey, Molly, get some of that Jew butter," you know. I mean, it was a slur every time she went to the grocery store to buy butter. When she went to school, her name was Nina, a foreign name at that time, not so unusual now. The first grade teacher declared, "That's not an American name. We'll call you Eleanor." She grew up never knowing what her real name was, and her older sister's husband, Sidney, called her Elle till the day he died. She was Elle, not Nina. She didn't even know her first name till she married my father, and they got out her birth certificate. "Wow, you mean I'm called Nina?" He insisted she be called Nina from that day on. He was proud of her ancestry, her ethnicity. He had no problem with that. So I guess part of what makes you more accepting is if you grow up in a family where people have to be accepting, right? It helps. And if you know the pain your parents went through or your mother went through while she was being discriminated against, you work a little harder not to make anybody else feel that pain. So I think that's what brought me here. Also growing up in big communities. I was born in New York City, raised in Los Angeles, lived 6 blocks south of the Mormon Temple in Los Angeles, went to school with blacks, Hispanics, Asians, Mormons, Jews, Christians, and I'm sure there were quite a few others in there that I didn't know of. I bet there were a few Baha'i, and I don't know what other faiths might have been represented. But in a big city, you're automatically tossed into a melting pot. So I had friends who were Mormon, and from the time they were old enough to think about such thing, they knew when they graduated from high school, they were going to go spend 2 years as missionaries. You don't get married, you don't go to college, you get out of school, you become a missionary for 2 years. I was in awe. I could not have imagined doing that. So, you know, that was a little widening of my horizon there, because otherwise, if I hadn't gone to school with Mormons, I wouldn't have had a clue how their church worked. I still don't know it well, but it was just an opportunity to get to know a group of people who were different. and who were my friends. So automatically that was a widening of a horizon. And when I went to college, I went to night school and I worked during the day. And night school, have any of you gone to night school? That opens your eyes because you're not in school with a bunch of privileged 18-year-olds who are in college and whose parents are paying for it and who think that except for kind of attending classes, they're really there to go with fraternities and sororities and drink a lot and party. You're
So
in
that's not what college is?
that well,
Oh,
that's what I saw in college before I changed to adult night school was that everybody was looking to party. I'm sorry. Maybe your kids aren't, maybe my kids didn't. They didn't tell me if they did. But, but when you go to night school, that's another whole segment of society and one I am glad I got to know. These are people who are working all day or parents all day long, usually the mothers. They're getting an education at night after working a 40-hour week because they want to make their lives better. They value every minute they're in class. They don't miss unless they're home with sick children or they've got to work some hours that they weren't expecting. You get to see people who have their feet in the real world. And that's another experience I would never have had if I just kind of had the average middle class upbringing in a single ethnicity home with a single faith, maybe in a smaller town where everybody was white and mostly Christian. I could be speaking of Enid, you know. I mean, on the whole, it's a pretty homogeneous society. There are other ethnicities and there are other races and there are other faiths, but if you're white and middle class in Enid, what you know is other middle class whites, right? Unless you're in the Air Force, then you get to travel and meet a lot of other different people. When I went to college, I worked in the daytime. I worked at International House, which was a dormitory for international students who could come and stay. These were graduate students who could come and stay there. They could rent a room. It had a wonderful small room, looked kind of like a monastery cell, bathroom down the hall. But it did have a cafeteria, 3 meals a day, living rooms, areas where you could be with other people, maybe from your own area of the world. So I worked there and got to meet a lot of students and families as I was in charge of renting out 500 rooms when they were open in the summer. But I got to, again, have a lot of ethnic experiences that I wouldn't have otherwise. I accidentally pronounced a man from Africa. I pronounced his name right. I'd been practicing it for a week because it was this long, and, 10, 15 syllables. And he got tears in his eyes when I said it right. He said, "That's the first time I've heard my name said right since I came to America."
Wow.
I didn't know if I was saying it right, but he's far away from home. Nobody knows who he is. Nobody can say his name right. So anyway, if I grew up accepting and multi-ethnic, it's just because life put me there. But like the verse in Romans said, accept others because he accepts you.
Yeah.
And then our children went off and got married. And Beth got married in Ireland. She's Christian. They only have 2 flavors of faith, you're Protestant or you're Catholic. Eddie's from the Republic of Ireland, that is the independent nation of Ireland, and he's from the Catholic half. His family had never met a Protestant till they met us. And they would tell stories about growing up and, a Protestant lived down the street. They didn't actually ever know them, but their mom took the lady a loaf of bread and tried to be welcoming. And the little girl went down the street with her and tried to see behind the lady. Do you know why? because she'd been told that Protestants had devil's tails.
Wow.
And she wanted to see that. So she's edging her way around the lady in the door while the mother is talking to the lady in the door and giving her some bread and honey, making her acceptable in a new home, accepted in a new home. So they were in awe that we would let our daughter marry a Catholic. Over and over and over and over. That was what we heard. To us, it was nothing. Catholics are Christian. They worship Christ. They may pray to saints or to Mary for intercession, but they're not worshiping those people, those figures. They pray to God and they worship Christ, okay? But they could not imagine a Protestant allowing their daughter to marry a Catholic, because they would never have done it the other way around, I promise you. Those devil's tails would have gotten in the way every time. So we didn't know we were being particularly accepting, but they were completely in awe. And during the ceremony, the priest kept mentioning how incredible it was that we would allow this to happen. And I have to admit, it had to be incredible for Eddie's family to accept Beth. She didn't have a devil's tail, but they'd grown up believing that, right? And well, it's pretty hard to change what you believe if you've believed it all your life.
Wow, that's true.
The other marriages of our kids are not that exotic, but John married a Japanese lady in Japan. I have half Japanese grandchildren. She's of Shinto Buddhist faith. It's a blend of faith, Shintoism and Buddhism. The way she described it is, I hope I get the two correct. One is serious and has to do with death and afterlife, and the other one is joy and happiness, and they've blended them into one faith, which takes the form of worship of each of those faiths, okay? He went to church with us when he was with us in the summers, so he was raised Christian. Their family comes to church here. It's not a problem for them. But again, it's a multicultural opportunity that you might not otherwise have. So acceptance just comes with the opportunity to be accepting. But you've got people out there all over that you meet and work, in school, at ball games, wherever you are, and if you adopt the people you're least comfortable with, you might get the opportunity to do some of the things I've gotten to do by chance. Okay? And I don't know what else to say.
If it's not too painful, you have a daughter who was killed.
Yeah.
And where is her husband from?
Oh, well, as some of you know, Kirsten's husband is from France. And she met him when they were both graduate students in the same apartment building. And they didn't marry until after they had each gotten a graduate degree. She went on to the University of Michigan to get a degree in cell biology, an advanced degree. And he stayed anyway, after a while they were actually able to marry. But she lived in England because she worked for the Imperial Cancer Research Fund, and he lived in Paris because he had a job with Saint-Gobain, which Saint-Gobain is how it's spelled. You would know it. The name's on everything if you look for it. He's Catholic from a little tiny village in France.
And the wedding was there.
The wedding was there.
So you had a wedding in Ireland, a wedding in France. Where did John get married?
He got married twice, once in America and once in Japan.
All right. World travelers here.
And, but it's neat. It's like, her wedding was like something out of a medieval the town is medieval. The church was this big old stone middle-aged church. The wedding procession, if she'd been a girl from that town, the wedding procession would have started at her home. But it started at her parents-in-law home because she wasn't from there. And we walked the whole procession, Keith with Kirsten on his arm, all of the wedding procession, the bridegroom, his parents, all the way through town, all the way up to the church. So there are pictures of them walking the entire procession. And if you've seen movies where the bride walks through the town and all the people come out, right, to watch, that's how it was, right out of a movie. France is a secular government, so the wedding is only recognized by the state if it's a civil ceremony. So the first ceremony was at the mayor's office. And then across the street diagonally to the old church for a church wedding in this very old, wonderful stone church. Again, just a wonderful opportunity to see another culture. She died a year and 2 days after they were married. They were back here in the summer. She wanted to make a U-turn to go back. She'd missed the turnoff she wanted. She was on a 2-lane country road and she pulled out in front of a semi. She did not look back. It killed her. It did not injure Carl except for a concussion. But I know people here. I can look at a lot of faces of people who've lost children.
Mm-hmm. Carl has since remarried.
He's remarried. I have Keith and I have 2 honorary French grandchildren.
And they've actually come to Ames?
Yeah. No, Carl and his family have not since the boys got married. One of them's hyperactive. They haven't yet faced getting on an airplane.
Got it. All right.
Flying 8 hours with him. They have not come back. Carl's come back.
Okay.
They will come back someday. He keeps saying every summer, he says, well, maybe next summer when Luca's a little quieter. But we're honored that they kept us in their lives after they married and moved on.
Yeah. We'll finish with that because...
taking up a lot of time.
Well, that's okay. Those are amazing stories that, you don't hear in Ames, Oklahoma very often. And I think it's a testimony to your lives and the love that you have for people, that you're still in contact, that a man in France still loves you enough to come back.
He calls frequently.
Yeah.
And he likes to talk French politics. So if you want to hear an hour diatribe on the political party he's not happy with, I'll put you on the call. Yes, Will.
How did you and Keith meet, and how did you decide to come back to Ames? Can you tell us that story?
That's pretty simple. We were both at the University of Missouri. Yeah, middle of the country.
You were professors there?
I taught at Westminster College, which is in a little town nearby. It was at the time an all-boys college affiliated with an all-girls college in the same town called William Wood.
And what did you teach?
German. Well, maybe that's another reason. If you study a foreign language, you automatically get pulled into the literature and the culture of that country. I studied both German and Russian and French in high school, and that just gives you... I was good
I can barely get English, so.
I was good at nothing except foreign language. I can't add 2 and 2 without a calculator.
What about Keith?
Keith was getting a doctoral degree in English. His dissertation was The Venerable Bede, B-E-D-E, a middle-aged philosopher in the Catholic Church. And we met through mutual friends who took me to a party at his house. And sorry, it sounds like a romance novel, but we were inseparable from that point on. And he wanted to come to California and be a freelance photographer. And I said, well, I'll go wherever you go. So after 2 years of not having any money, we moved back to Ames to help his father do roofing. He thought, well, maybe I'll do a photographic essay on a year in Ames, but we stayed for the next 40 years. So
And he wrote the book on it.
he wrote the book on Ames. He wrote well. He was an English major. I loved Ames. I'd never felt so rooted, so content, so sure that my children were safe, so sure that the children they met were good children from good homes whose parents were there if they had a party, whose parents were there if they slept over, whose parents knew what they were eating and drinking, whose parents knew what kind of movies they were watching. It was good to come to Ames. And the whole community at that time was that way. Anybody's child was cared for by anybody who saw them in need at any time, anywhere.
I moved here in '81, and I think you had just moved here not shortly before.
76.
76. And you lived in the rattiest little house I'd ever.
1 block north, and it didn't look any better then than it looks now.
But you were always happy.
Yeah.
You were
Well.
always happy.
Our first house cost $6,000. Our first car that we bought new cost $6,700. It was an orange Datsun.
And you drove that thing forever.
We had to think a long time
All right.
before we bought a car that cost more than our house.